Thank you, Ben from Clay Bottom Farm, for hosting this webinar on lean farming. Just a reminder that you can now subscribe to his Lean Market Growing Masterclass by going to claybottomfarm.com, where you can also buy his two books, The Lean Farm and The Lean Farm Guide to Growing Vegetables.
Lean system is a Japanese production system focused on eliminating waste to increase productivity and profits with less work. It can be contrasted to the idea that the only way to grow a business is to increase the size of the business. In other words, to grow through expansion. And so eliminating waste is the ticket instead of expansion to grow a business. It's a global system by now used by nonprofits. Hospitals are using it, and of course farms, because waste is ubiquitous. Any workplace environment has waste that can be gotten rid of. So this is a Japanese system, and they have a fairly tight definition of work and waste. And so lean system is a coin. There are two sides to it. And there are only ever two activities actually that are happening in a workplace. So think about your own farm. There's value adding work. This is when you're touching your product and it causes the value of the product to go up. And so when you harvest carrots, when you wash carrots, when you deliver them, you're interacting with those carrots and the value of the carrots goes up. Everything else is waste or muda. So just a few activities on farms actually add value, and lots of activities add waste or muda. And we're going to get to the Japanese list of 7 types of muda here as we in the middle part of the presentation. But look at the formula at the bottom of your screen here. So capacity is work plus waste. So the way to increase capacity according to the lean system is cut out the waste, decrease the waste, increase the amount of actual value adding work that's happening. This is my favorite quote in the lean literature. Tichi Ono at Toyota said, all we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point when we collect the cash, and we're reducing that timeline by removing the non-value adding waste. So it's really not a complicated system, but it's counterintuitive and difficult to implement. I'm going to give you some tools to make it easier. A bit more about us. My wife and I own and operate Clay Bottom Farm in Goshen, Indiana. It's a 1/3 acre vegetable farm. We sell all of our food within 1.5 miles of the farm. And we're the behind the scenes farm for 2 restaurants and a local food co-op. And we use lean to organize our work and to earn a comfortable living from just 1/3 of an acre growing produce. I want to address a myth here at the beginning, which is that lean is mean. That takes the soul out of your work. Or that it implies that you only need to focus on the numbers, on making money, or that it might encourage you to stuff as many hogs into your hog house as possible. And certainly you can use lean to that effect. However, it doesn't need to be so. I see it like this. Lean helps you get rid of waste so that you have time to focus on what you value. And that can include hanging out with kids. You can see a picture of our 2 kids here going on vacations, and also incorporating an ecological mindset to your farming. So this is just a proof that we don't always do things in the most efficient way possible at our farm. This is my son and I doing some broad forking. Okay, so let's take a little trip. Let's go back in time to Japan, to the year 1603. You would have seen an island full of rice paddies. Rice was and remains a dominant commodity crop grown in Japan by small farmers. This, you would have also seen interesting things happening culturally in Japan. This was a period of Japan's Great Isolation, also called the Edo period. And Japan had cut itself off from mainland China and from the rest of the world. And there was almost no interaction between those who lived on the island and those who lived off the island. And so you saw a flourishing of kabuki theater, banruku puppets, samurai traditions, haiku, the origami tradition. All these quintessentially Japanese cultural traditions really flourished and took off during the Edo period. And in agriculture, something interesting was happening too. Historians call this Japan's industrious revolution. where take a look at the number of households in Japan went from almost 50 to almost 80,000. So great expansion in their population, and yet they lost their oxen. Their most significant piece of technology went from 13,000 to 4,000. Mostly those were used in the king's court. And so what I ask farmers to do is imagine, what if next growing season you lost your biggest piece of technology, maybe a greenhouse or a tractor, and you were tasked to produce more food. That's the challenge that these farmers faced. And yet they did it. We know through the historical records that people were eating better, and lifespan, in fact, increased by more than 10 years during the Edo period, which is proof that the farmers stepped up. What they did was apply teamwork and eliminated waste. For teamwork, they developed these UE collective work system, where they rice, for example, is a crop that has to be transplanted within 15 days of seeding, and there's a fairly narrow window of time in which it needs to be transplanted. A lot of our vegetable crops, we might have a week or two or more to go from seedling to transplant, but with rice you have to act quick. And so what they did was they formed work teams and got rice transplanted together in groups, communities or groups of farmers, UE collectives, would have performed this work. And they also transformed their tools. The oxen-driven implements, they turned into human-powered tools. And that tradition continues. If you want to go down a fascinating internet rabbit hole, punch in farming tools from the Edo period, and I wish these tools were still available to us today. Unfortunately, a lot of the newer tools on the market seem to be getting cheaper and cheaper every year, and poorer and poorer construction quality. And in these countries, however, they've only had small and micro scale farmers, and so tools and engineering has been focused on that scale of agriculture. And so you see all kinds of excellent tools coming out of these places. Here's the now famous paper pot transplanter tool that came out of Japan. Farmers started using in mass here about 8 or so years ago. And now you can more easily import tools from these countries, and it's really changing the way we farm on our farm and on many other farms too. So let's keep our headspace back in Japan. Fast forward a bit to World War II, and they say lean is a system for tough times. Lean books sell very well during recessions. And part of the reason is that lean began or arose, this thinking arose around this context of World War II, where you had industry that was bombed out. No stable suppliers. Imagine being Toyota at this time. No one was making tires or steering wheels and bumpers, the parts that you need to assemble a vehicle. Very little capital to work with, and obviously a very limited market for cars in Japan. The roads had been destroyed for the most part. And yet, they had this competition. Our U.S. automakers here, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, the slide was greased for decades of mass production of vehicles. And really, these three dominated the global automobile industry and produced a lot of pretty crappy cars, to be honest, for a lot of decades. And but Toyota didn't give up. They said, we're going to create what we call TPS, a Toyota Production System. We're going to try to catch our U.S. counterparts within 3 years. And we're going to do this with who we have, which is to say rice farmers. The original spelling of Toyota had a D at the end and stood for fertile rice fields, which harkens back to its agricultural beginnings. And so the first workers at Toyota were descendants of rice farmers, or kids or grandkids of these rice farmers. So necessity was the mother of invention. To make a real long story short, they did it. Toyota eventually became #1 in profits and employee retention and in market share. And by the late 70s, early 80s in the US, we started to take note. And because Toyota was doing something we needed to obviously learn from. And so MIT sent a team of researchers over to Toyota, and came back with some conclusions that they codified and called the lean system. So in short, here's what those MIT researchers found. Here's how they did it. First, they use a organization system that is called usually 5S, or it means essentially being ruthless, being rid of anything non-essential in your workplace. Second tip, precisely identify value. This is information that you get from your customers. You keep your own values locked away. Well, you want to keep your own values and incorporate your own values, but to run your business, keep an ear very closely attuned to your customer. Cut out the muda or waste, anything, like I said, not in service of adding value to your product. And then practice kaizen, or continuous improvement, every year. So through this presentation, I'm going to walk us through each of these 4 steps and how we applied them to our farm. Here's an image of inside of our greenhouse where we're making sure that every square foot gets used. This is my wife, Rachel, and I inside of that greenhouse. And before we were lean, we were very unlean. I grew up on a corn, soybean, cattle farm, and got degrees in. I have a degree in philosophy, in English, and you can just imagine what my earning potential was after college. And Rachel had grown up. We both grown up in Mennonite families, but in her family had a giant garden, did a lot of canning, and so farming and growing food was sort of in our DNA. We rented backyards at the beginning. We bought this dilapidated adobe style house that you see here, and we live in Goshen, a college town of about 40,000. And we had little money, and we're just married, needed a roof over our heads, and so we bought this place. But actually, come to think of it, there wasn't actually a roof on that house, so I can't say we were putting a roof over our heads at the beginning. But we spent 4 years or so, or 3 or so years, fixing up this place and selling food. We turned the yard into a vegetable patch. This was actually a clay bottom tennis court that was next to that Spanish style house. It was a resort style house for Chicago folks in the 1920s that had been abandoned for a stretch of time. And so we plowed in that tennis court, and you can see our first vegetable patch behind us and how young and eager we are. Our goal, and to make a long story short, again, we rented plots around town. We began as an urban multi-plot farm, and we grew tired of carting our tools into our truck and driving around to our plots. And we yearned to be able to put up greenhouses and install the infrastructure we needed to do the things you need to do to farm for a living. And so we sold that house and used the equity in it to make a down payment on a dairy farm. This is an Amish dairy farm. That is the farm that we based the lean farm books off of, and we converted it to a vegetable farm. Our goal was to grow as quickly as we could. We had quit our jobs, and we wanted to try out this farming experiment to see if we could do it. And the truth be told, we actually weren't doing it. We were working really hard. Our early production system was low tech. It was backbreaking. We didn't have the money, or didn't choose to invest always in the things that we needed. And farming is a huge learning curve. There simply were not the resources then that there are now for learning. And part of my inspiration to create the online course is to save other people years of backbreaking labor to cut straight to high profit production. So I'll tell you a short story about what happened, though. Is one afternoon, there was a 40 mile per hour gale force wind that picked up our newest greenhouse and blew it on top of the barn roof. And Rachel was in the house. We were both in the house at the time, and Rachel heard the thunk of the greenhouse hitting the roof. She ran to the window and looked, and she said, "Oh, Ben, you had better come over here and check this out. You're not going to believe what I'm seeing." And I had a sneaking suspicion of what made that noise, but I went to the window and I looked out the window and I saw the greenhouse on the roof. We had just gotten done dismantling this thing from another farm, transporting it to our new farm, and reconstructing it. I had a summer's worth of labor involved here. And you can imagine the mood I was in. I went straight to the refrigerator and grabbed a couple of Heinekens and drowned my emotions with beer, which is a thing we do, I guess. But it worked for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so. And then Rachel and I had to have a frank conversation and ask, okay, is this working? And maybe it's time that we reconsider our decision to quit our jobs and jump into farming. And I'll tell you what happened around that time is one of our CSA customers had heard about the greenhouse on the roof and sent us a check in the mail to cover the cost of another hoop house. And she said she wanted to remain anonymous. However, she wanted us to keep growing, because where else was she going to get fresh food? One of our chefs heard about the greenhouse on the roof problem and emailed me and said he'd be willing to come out and build another greenhouse with me if we could finance it. And so we had even though Rachel and I were questioning our decisions about whether to keep farming, the community around us wanted us to keep going. And so we did, but we said we're going to have to do it with a different approach. And so we applied lean thinking as we rebuilt. One of our CSA customers, Steve Brenneman, owns the aluminum trailer company, and he came out and coached us on these 4 lean tools I'm going to show you here. First, 5S on the farm. We just simply had too many things on the farm. We're doing too many things, and we needed to simplify our physical space so we could move faster. And so it was time to, step 1 of this 5S system is sort. And you can do this in an office. You don't have to be a farmer to apply these. But if we needed to define a clear workspace boundary. We didn't know where the farm began and where the household ended. We needed to get rid of anything not used almost every week for adding value. So usefulness is the metric. If you're using a tool and touching it frequently, keep it. If you haven't touched something in 6 months, you're probably not going to touch it in the next 6 months. And if you haven't used something in a year, you're probably not going to use it the next year, and so on and so forth. So keep what you're using, but get rid of everything else, and don't squirrel. Remove it from the workplace, physically remove it. And simple is best. You want to choose the fewest possible number of tools to farm with. And then if you need to, choose a red tag room. Find a holding space for items that you're thinking about, and you're not sure whether to keep or not to keep, but remove it from the production space. So I'll show you some before and after pictures. Here's here's our storage solution. Before leaning up, we thought we had to collect every shovel made in the state of Indiana. And afterwards, we actually realized, going through all those tools, that we only touched a few of them in the past growing season. Most of them we didn't. And so we selected just a few tools to keep. Step 2 is set in order. You want to store your tools where you're using them, spread them out, and store them where you see them at eye level. So here we're keeping tools close to their points of use. If you come to our farm, you'll see tools hanging, not in a central tool shed, but spread out across the farm, close to where we're using them. A third step, leaning up, is about shining and seeing, so you can see your work. You want clean workspaces, not cluttered workspaces. Then make sure your workspaces are well lit. You know what 0 is. Be able to take your farm to 0 daily, meaning a very clean state. Don't let things get out of hand, would be another way to put it. So here are some before and after pictures. Here's that milking parlor that we converted into a processing room. We painted, we installed high lumen light fixtures, and tried to remove from the room anything not absolutely essential for processing vegetables. 4th step, standardize. Do the same thing the same way every time. Very difficult to do on a farm because the seasons change. You never know what pests are going to come disrupt your plans. However, to the extent that you can, simplify every process every season. Standards should always be changing, by which I mean they should always be simplifying. And so we got rid of the, I don't know, 10 to 20 different types of harvesting containers and simplified down to one type of harvesting container. It's more intuitive and easy to figure out what to use. This is a picture of our current farm. We decided all bed lengths should be the same length, should be the same width. This lets us reuse drip tapes, unify our irrigation systems. Our greenhouse even is these are 75 feet bed lengths. Our greenhouse is 150 feet. That way 2 beds fit in which we split in half. So 2 beds can fit into a greenhouse. And standardization has made a huge difference in turn for our productivity. 5th step, sustain the rest of the 5S steps and use pictures if you can. And so we have a processing room you see here at our new farm. And what we do is hang a picture of what that processing room should look like, what 0 is in that processing room. And then workers can just look at the picture and restore the room to 0. So step 5 means sorting, setting, and order, and shining need to be routine, made part of everyday work. And you want to do this in short, high-frequent spurts, not long, low-frequent spurts. We used to wait till the end of the growing season, clutter up the farm, and then think that, oh, in the winter we'll have time and energy to clean it all up. Well, of course, it didn't always turn out that we had the time and energy and gumption to make it happen. And instead, the time to clean is as you're working. So when you are finished washing 100 pounds of lettuce, that's the time to clean the processing room back to 0. When you're done hosing the carrots, that's the time to spray down the hosing station, which you can see here. So pictures, I highly recommend pictures. If you have other people helping you on the farm, pictures communicate a lot better than you can and set a very clear standard. Okay, step number 2, this four-part system, is to precisely identify value. So look at the 3 questions and then 3 middle boxes here. This is at the heart of the lean system. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope you remember these questions. What customers want, when they want it, and the amount they want. So in Japan, Toyota, this is how they beat the US, is that they sent engineers over to the US to test drive cars and minivans. And they took assiduous notes and they asked their customers here, what they wanted, when they wanted, and how much. And they knew precisely how many cup holders Americans wanted. They knew precisely the turning radius they wanted. They knew that Americans wanted to put 4x8 sheets of drywall in the back of their vans. And US manufacturers hadn't gone to that level of depth to truly understand their customer and let their customer take the lead. So how might this apply to a farm? Well, every winter we meet with our chefs and we go over a value sheet. It's very simple. 3 columns. What do you want? When do you want it? And how much? And the rows then would specify what they tell us. And if a chef tells us they want tomatoes, for instance, we will come back at them and say, what color do you want? What size? What level of ripeness? Be very precise. And when do you want those tomatoes delivered? Saturday mornings, Sunday afternoons, you tell us. How much? How many pounds per week? And so if you can do this with, say, 6 or 10 different accounts, you have a blueprint for a very powerful blueprint for a lean business. So you can take those value sheets and turn them into your crop production plan. I want to encourage you to choose customers and crops shrewdly. This has been very crucial to our success. We don't grow 100 different crops. We don't sell to 20 different customers. We're highly selective. We could. I have the capacity I know how to grow lots and lots of crops. We have developed relationships over the years with dozens of customers. However, we're choosing just a few crops and a few customers that are at the top 20%. This is also called the Pareto principle, which is to say that usually 20% of your products generate 80% of your income in most businesses. 20% of customers usually or often contribute 80% of your revenues. So 20% of your efforts result in 80% of the outcomes. And so if you can learn how to put on a set of glasses, analyze your business, recognize where's the 20%, who's the 20%, and let's focus on that 20%, it can catapult you into high profit production. Here are the 4 focus crops that we produce. Tomatoes, specifically heritage tomatoes. Salad mix, which is to say greens such as Mizuna and mixed with lettuce. Kale and spinach. We do grow a range of crops, a dozen or so beyond this, but these are the focus crops that we want to make sure that we're producing as much of these crops as we can for as long of a season as we can. Because look at the circles on the left. These are low cost of production, high volume crops that sell for high prices. Okay, this is what we want to focus on. High margin crops. Okay, so next step is to tackle the muda, third step. And muda, remember, being the term for waste. And the reason why I like this concept is this formula here is eliminated waste is equal to capacity. You don't have to grow your business. You can just cut out the waste and work smarter, not harder, so to speak. If you shave 4 hours a week, you can take 1 year off every 10 years. If you can shave 5% of your costs every year, over 10 years, you've achieved 50% growth without actually having to expand your business, just working smarter. And you don't have to do it all in 1 year. You just have to have a mindset that sets you on the right path, on a lean path, so that every year you're working smarter and shaving just a little bit of your costs. And we do this, we print out our expense ledger every year and we ask, okay, where's the 5%? How could we produce as much in the next growing season as we did this past growing season by cutting out some costs instead of by expanding? Okay, so here's the coveted list. Teiji Ono at Toyota developed, I said, a list of 7 wastes, and overburdening, the new one, is a newer concept. And in the remaining 15 minutes here, I want to go over each of these with a few pictures to show you how you might get rid of these on a farm. But just to list them quickly: overproduction, the waste of waiting, the waste of transportation or driving around too much, overprocessing waste, packaging too much, inventory waste, having too many supplies and tools on hand, defect waste, crop failures. It would be the example in farming. And then waste in motion, taking too many steps. And then overburdening waste. Where did you hurt the most? Where did your tools break? And there are books written on each of these. And it is impossible to completely summarize the lean system in one session, but I'm going to give it I'm going to try. First is the waste of overproduction. If you have a crop that does not sell, it's the most insidious form of waste, and you cannot afford it. You cannot afford to not sell your crops. And the way I put it is seeds should turn into cash. Every seed should turn into cash. And if it hasn't, then some kind of waste interrupted your production, or you overproduced, because you cannot afford to buy the seed, to cultivate the land, to put the seed in, to tend the crop, to irrigate it, to ward off pests, to cover it with row cover, to heat a greenhouse, whatever you need to do to bring that crop to fruition, to harvest it and wash it, transport it, and then to not sell it. That's a recipe for putting you out of business, because you can't afford all those costs without selling a crop. Okay, so this is where those value sheets come in handy. You need to be growing what you have sold as much as possible. I'm all for farmers markets, and I think they're great incubators. However, at a farmers market, you don't know what's going to sell, and there's bound to be more overproduction waste. The more you can sell, you can pre-sell your product, the better. Another solution, another way to work at this is with what I call tiered marketing, or 3-tier marketing, or layer cake marketing. Tomatoes, for example, we'll first put those into our CSA boxes. If we have more than fit into CSA boxes, then we'll sell to restaurants. If, let's say, we have more than actually we could sell to restaurants that week, well, then maybe we'll take them to a farmer's market. And so you can see that there's a layer cake effect here where we have multiple markets. And in fact, if we don't sell them at a farmer's market, we have an email list of people who appreciate food at a lower price for canning, so that we can, one way or another, sell every pound of food that we produce. Next is waiting and transportation waste. I'll combine these two to say, when is your product in stasis, or when is it being driven around too much? On lean farms, we want our products to move. We don't want to harvest and let them sit in our coolers. And we want people to move too, and they want to move too if they come to your farm. So just notice, when is a crop that's been picked, when is it sitting, not moving, closer to your customer, and when are workers not moving too? You want to see motion, and that motion should be in the direction of your customer. So we saw a lot of waiting waste, obviously, with our walk-in cooler. So we thought, with our new farm, well, maybe we could find systems or ways around it. And so we did. We eliminated the cooler, and instead we're delivering all of our crops within 4 hours time, harvesting in some cases directly into the delivery van, straight away to our customers. Waste of over-processing. I see this a lot at farmers markets where a farmer, there's really no need to wrap your food in plastic and put labels on it, especially at a farmer's market. Maybe at a grocery store you might have to, but sell your food out in the open. And I love going to markets in other countries because they're so good at doing this. Just right out on the street, you just set out a cloth and set out your food. That's really all you need to do. In our country, we seem to be addicted to wrapping everything in plastic. Inventory waste. Don't keep food on your farm. Keep stockpiles as low as possible in terms of your seeds, your row covers, all those supplies and parts you need. Keep those inventories as low as you possibly can. Recognizing that you do need to sometimes order seeds in bulk because the supply chain problems have been running out of seeds, but to the extent possible, keep low inventories. Defect waste means, when did you have failure in your product? And for us, it was often at the beginning stages. Actually, we had trouble with germination, using heating mats and other solutions, and we finally decided to just use a refrigerator with a crock pot. That's it, an old fridge, and we use one of these Inkbird external thermostats that controls the crock pot, and we can keep 1 to 2 degree differential in this germination chamber. In other words, if what we do is, well, frankly, I'll Google, if I'm growing fennel, for instance, I'll Google what's the optimum germination temperature for fennel. And the internet will tell me, oh, it's about 82.5 degrees. Okay, fine. We'll set the Inkbird to that temp, and then this crock pot will keep a nice, hot, steamy environment, very moist and warm, and we'll get perfect germination. As long as you check, you need to check. We check it on a daily basis, and as soon as crops pop, as soon as the seeds pop, we'll pull them out, put them under grow lights or in the propagation house. But it's a way to achieve very near 100% germination. Important with that, very important, as expensive as seeds are. Waste of motion. There are all kinds of ways to waste motion on a farm. I'll just talk about one of them, and just to say field management, or also called bed preparation. We read all the organic farming books. It told us that you should do a version of this process. Start with a plow or tilling an old crop in, and then it's time to seed your cover crops, because that's the most efficient way to supposedly to get nutrition in the ground. And then you're gonna need to pack in those seeds. You need to mow the cover crop after it's grown, and you'll need to plow or till in the cover crop, then probably till again for seed bed preparation. So you see, we have at least 6 passes, what we call field passes, or driving a tractor or walking over a plot of land before your cash crop seed goes in. And it's going to take time to do all this, 3 or 6 months or more, depending on the type of cover crop. And then per growing bed, it would take at least a couple of hours to perform all this work. So we wondered, maybe there's a leaner way to do it. Here's what we do now. Number one, start with 4 inches of compost. This is called the deep mulch method. And then add another inch of compost every fall, or every 2 years in the fall. And a rule undergirding this process is we're going to try to, when crops are done, smother them and not till them in. Let me show you how this works. Going to start growing beds with 4 inches of compost. You're going to lay this compost right on the surface and not till it in. And then skim coat every few years with another inch of top dressing of compost. What's happening here is that we're feeding the biological life in the soil, in that original compost, to keep it alive. We have little animals, little horses. If the compost is like a barn, we've got little cows and horses and goats and sheep in there, and we need to keep feeding them and need to keep watering them too. And that's the mindset we use to keep high biological activity. Here's a picture of us skim coating in the winter. If you don't have time in the fall, winter's fine. And in fact, you can drive heavy equipment over ground in the winter because it's frozen. And grow straight into that compost. Don't till it in. The compost will help smother the weeds. If you till it in, you're only bringing weed seeds up to the surface. And then, like I said, smother crops. When you're finished, when a crop is finished, just cover them. We like to use these fairly small tarps. This is about 14 feet by 75 feet, our bed length. And these tarps are very effective at smothering and killing crops when they're finished. We're not going to mow the crop first, usually, unless it's tall, like cilantro or something. We might mow it down so that the tarp covers it more nicely. But for the most part, we're just going to throw down a tarp, throw down some sand bags, and then pull off the tarp and rake. In the summer, it takes 2 weeks maximum actually to kill most crops, sometimes less. And in the spring and fall, when you have cooler temperatures, it can take 3 or 4 weeks or longer. It just depends on the season. However, it's a very effective way at keeping nutrients on your farm and saving work. We don't have to pull out these old crops, don't even have to own a tractor for this process. And once we've raked a bit, we only rake as much as needed, and then we'll go ahead and replant. You can see the picture of us using that paper pot transplanter to replant crops. And it's fine to have old new crops mixing together, despite what the books will tell you. We have not seen problems having decomposition happening very close to new growth. A cardinal rule here: leave roots in the ground. So we obviously can't cover this tall kale with a tarp. I wish we could, but instead we'll cut it off at the base. But we're not going to rip out the roots. Leave those roots right in the ground. As they decompose, they leave nice little air pockets to keep the soil nice and loose. And of course, provides carbon or food for those micronutrients, microorganisms. What's most striking, I think, about this system is what we don't do. We don't till. We don't use tractors. We don't crop rotate. I'm fine growing kale on top of kale on top of kale one season after the next. And I think actually there might be some benefit to that. The microorganisms might develop some long-term relationships with plant roots from a similar family. We don't use cover crops, as stated. Our cash crops become cover crops. When they're done, we smother them and leave the nutrients in the ground. We see very fast growth because of high nutrient levels. There's 21 days from seed to harvest with these greens. We're going to, you can see the thick levels of compost here. In the summer, I'd like to cover greens with shade cloth for the first 2 or 3 weeks after transplanting. That's what's going on here. And this is an animal-based system, a microbial system. The biota in the soil is incredible. 1 billion microbes per teaspoon of soil. I could give a whole presentation or session on maximizing microbial life in the soil. But let me just sum it up to say that we don't actually know what's going on down there. Fewer than 10% of microbes have been identified by scientists. 90% haven't. And these are complex relationships that we are just beginning to understand. And thankfully, there's a lot of new research and data out there, but I think there's plenty more to come because this is the future of farming. Minimalist composting, I'll just show you a couple of pictures. People wonder, well, how can you afford 4 inches of compost? We have the city of Goshen, the town we live in, they deliver leaves to us, no cost. We'll flip them 3 times with a skid lifter, and they're ready in a year. As long as we're not perfectionists. There's no perfectionism here. You see there's sticks and chunks left in the compost, and that's just fine. The compost will continue to break down in the field as long as you can plant into it. You don't need to have perfect structure in your compost. So just to summarize, the benefits are fewer weeds, less work, which I like. It fits nicely in the lean system, and then a slow release of fertility. For many years, they say up to 9 years after applying compost, it's still releasing nutrients. Okay, the last waste, mirroring. In other words, where did you hurt? Where did your tools wear out? One place that I was always felt burdened was with ventilating greenhouses, going out and rolling them up and rolling them down, checking the temperatures. And we resolved at our new farm to take care of that problem. And one way we did it was to put peak vent systems in. And I think all new hoop houses and greenhouses should have peak ventilation. And fortunate, it was the case that they just were not affordable systems. And now they're more affordable peak vent systems. CT greenhouse would be one place to go to. And then we put one of the Orisha systems in, which takes physical burden off of our work. I don't have to roll up and down curtains, and mental burden too, because I don't have to constantly be worrying about, is it too hot or too cold in the greenhouse? The data is collected. I don't have to manually keep track. The greens harvester tool is a wonderful tool I recommend if you're growing greens, but by all means, put a bigger handle on the thing. And so we took off the original handle and put a taller one on to remove the burden of bending over so much. This is something we sell about 100 pounds a week, and so I'm doing what you're looking at here twice a week, and I'm now 40 plus, and so it's nice to have tools that are more ergonomic that'll keep me farming for longer. Okay, last couple of slides, I want to talk just a little bit about kaizen, or this idea of continuous improvement. Essentially, I'll summarize it by saying you want to every season repeat 5S, the value maps or the value sheets, and the muda eliminating. So you want to get more decluttered every season. You want to more deeply develop a deeper relationship with your customer, precisely know what, when, how much, and then get rid of more waste every season. That's the summary of the lean system. And it's a job for everyone to do. Here's our kids helping us. And I'll tell you, some of the best ideas have come from kids under 8 years old. It's really incredible. Anyone who's close to the work will have an idea for improving it, no matter what age or skill level. I want to close with a couple of my favorite quotes. E.F. Schumacher said, "Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction." And finally, from George Washington Carver, who's been teaching, who was teaching about all this stuff and long before me, said, turning waste into useful channels should be the slogan of every farmer. Let me say that again. Turning waste into useful channels should be the slogan of every farmer. And that has been the secret to our success here.
Thank you, Ben from Clay Bottom Farm, for hosting this webinar on lean farming. Just a reminder that you can now subscribe to his Lean Market Growing Masterclass by going to claybottomfarm.com, where you can also buy his two books, The Lean Farm and The Lean Farm Guide to Growing Vegetables.